Okay, folks, welcome back to Unit 2, Biological Basis for Behavior. Right now we're going to take a look at Module 11, taking a look at the brain as well as the old brain structures. Okay, and we'll talk about what I mean by that. We'll also talk about the limbic system here at the tail end of this module. Alrighty, so let's get going. Two things. There's two different ways that scientists study the brain. And two of the effects of these two processes. One is called a lesion. And a lesion is where brain tissue is destroyed, surgically destroyed. And basically, destroying certain parts of brain tissue causes certain types of reactions in the human subjects. This is only usually done in very rare instances where the patient usually suffers from some type of severe neurological condition, incredibly severe epilepsy, severe Parkinson's, certain deficiencies or oversupplies of other certain neurotransmitters will cause neurologists and neurosurgeons to try to lesion parts of the brain to help limit the impacts of certain conditions. Stimulation, on the other hand, is where we use electrical charge or chemicals or magnets to impact the neurological communication of that area of the brain. I mentioned to you guys in class that I have a good friend who suffers from Parkinson's, and he actually had he's getting ready to have his second surgery where pads, electrically charged pads, will be placed inside of his brain on top of his brain lobes that will send minute charges into the brain and the areas of the brain impacted by his Parkinson's. And it's designed to help minimize those seizures once they begin. Okay, so moving on. All right, so let's take a look at some of our tests. EEG, electroencephalogram. Basically, the EEG is recording the brain waves, and all sorts of electrodes are attached all over the brain on top of the scalp. It's not something where they actually go in and attach. Oftentimes, it looks like kind of like a deranged swim cap that has all sorts of nodes or probes attached to the cap itself. And EEGs are effective at pinpointing symptoms of depression and anxiety. We've been able to deduce that the right frontal lobe is also associated with behavioral withdrawal and negative emotion, i.e. depression and anxiety. But it allows psychologists and neurologists to look at the areas of the brain impacted by those conditions. So, MEG, magnetocephalography. That's a mouthful. Magnetocephalography. Basically, the patient in this situation will wear a head coil that creates magnetic fields, and it will read the brain's electrical currents and the changes that those magnetic fields cause on those electrical currents sent throughout the brain, because our brain is it's a collection of electrical charges. This is particularly effective for those soldiers who suffer from PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Basically, people that have PTSD actually have stronger magnetic fields in the visual cortex. So when they see playbacks, which is a common occurrence for people that have gone through PTSD, their magnetic waves in their brain activity will actually increase. So an MEG is through the coils will actually read the increase of magnetic fields created by the electric impulses sent by the neurons. CT scan, computed tomography. A CT scan is basically an X-ray of the head, and it generates images that may locate TBI or traumatic brain injury. It can indicate tumors. It can indicate swelling and some other things. We've found throughout studies in actually 2015 that monkeys with anxious temperament have brains that use more glucose in areas of the brain that sense fear and are associated with memory, as well as the anticipation or expectations of rewards and punishments. Um, so, crap. Cut previous. Okay, CT scans, cut. CT scans, computed tomography. These are basically x-rays of the head, and they're done usually in slices. It looks like slices of bread. And these are particularly important when we look at brain injuries. And what we can see, especially in children, we see a lot of widespread use of CT scans, and oftentimes children that aren't yet able to communicate fully, especially really young adolescents and infants, they can use CT scans to predict whether or not they have particular impairments in intelligence, or if they have issues with their memory and memory processing. It's a good way for parents to find out if their child is acting abnormally, if that child is suffering from some sort of mental illness or potentially a learning disability. Okay, it also shows structural damage in those folks that have some sort of a TBI, traumatic brain injury. Okay, next, PET scan. A PET scan is a visual display that's going to show where slightly radioactive glucose levels exist. And what that does is, it's kind of like if you've ever heard of somebody getting a colonoscopy. I know that's not a pleasant thing, but in particular for men and women over the age of 50, it's important, especially to detect for colon cancer, especially males after the age of 50. In fact, some medical doctors are saying 45 is the new age that you should all have a colonoscopy. Basically, what they do is they make you drink this slightly radioactive dye, and then you can't eat anything for a while. And as that dye passes through your system, it highlights certain areas of the colon. In this case, we're doing a similar thing. The only difference is that the radioactivity is put into glucose, and that glucose is burned by the brain to create energy. And what it does is, in 2015, we found that monkeys, test monkeys, that were very anxious and borderline, nervous, they have brains that are going to use more glucose in regions that deal with fear, memory, and expectations of rewards and punishments. So the PET scan, again, tomography is where they're scanning for that slightly irradiated glucose level in the brain. And again, it helps us determine if somebody's going to have predisposition for, say, ADD, ADHD, certain other behavioral disorders, emotional disorders. Okay, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. A lot of us may have had this. This is really good for soft tissues. And basically what it does is you go into this little tube. I have a really good story about this. It's not a good story. It's actually a traumatic story for me. But this is a technique where you hear that knocking, like bam, 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 cling, 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 and you go into this tube, and what they'll do is they'll start sending a bunch of magnetically generated waves through your brain. And what it does is it basically reproduces, it's very similar to an X-ray, it's just far more detailed. And the reason that is that it creates a 3D image that can be looked at, and it can look at, again, irregularities in brain tissue. It can look at certain types of functioning for the brain. And what we see is that through MRI and MRI research, people that have a tendency to be very violent, or people that are surrounded by violence throughout their lives, will oftentimes have a decreased frontal lobe size, especially in the areas that deal with morality. Because of our frontal lobe, that's where a lot of our morality centers, and people that are violent oftentimes will have a smaller frontal cortex, or smaller frontal lobe. Okay, the last test that we need to know is fMRI, and this is basically the same thing as above. The only difference is that it's a functional magnetic resonance imaging, and an fMRI looks at blood flow and brain activity by looking at multiple different MRIs. And basically what it does is people that have undergone trauma, what they do is the researchers will do multiple MRIs, and they'll try to instill certain types of feelings and emotions or make the people relive the event. And what they'll do is they'll compare all of the different MRIs to create a compiled fMRI. The fMRI will show us basically what triggers the heightened emotion that we see, especially in PTSD or various other traumatic events in the people that have suffered them. Okay, fMRI. All right, let's look a little bit more into each one of these. Okay, so structures of the brain. You need to know what images look at structures of the brain. The CT scan, sometimes referred to as a CAT scan, the MRI and fMRI all look at structures of the brain. Okay, EEG, MEG. MEG is a fairly newer test that we have seen here in the last 10, 20 years. The PET and then fMRI, they all look at functioning. And you'll notice that fMRI actually will not only give us structures of the brain, but it'll also give us the functioning. The fMRI, which is quite expensive because it's multiple MRIs, and MRIs are not cheap. But it is a very good way to look at somebody that has suffered either some sort of PTSD or other trauma-related event and how it is affecting them. Okay, so again, to recap, here are your various different types of brain imaging tests. It is good to have an understanding of all of these. The AP exam will definitely cover at least a few of these, if not more than a few. And these oftentimes come in handy when we're writing the FRQ that deals with research application. Okay, as opposed to the content FRQ. All right, so brainstem. Here is your brainstem. Your brainstem is considered to be the old brain or the primal brain. This is the part of the body that is pretty much all automatic. All right, this is the part that we had to have just to start breathing. For example, at the top, and the way I like to associate the brainstem is like a ice cream cone. All right, at the top you have a thalamus. All right, and we'll talk about the different parts of each of this and what the function is. You have the reticular formation, which also includes the pons. All right, the brainstem is made up of the reticular formation and the medulla. All right, the thalamus is kind of a go-between between the brainstem and the actual cerebrum. The cerebrum is this top newer brain where we do our association, our memory, emotions, etc. Okay, so think of this as an ice cream cone. The ice cream is the thalamus, and then the brain stem is the cone. All right, the medulla, the pons, and then the reticular formation that holds the pons. Okay, make sure you know that. That will be on your test. All right, so the functions of the medulla. This always reminds me of Billy Madison, if you've ever seen it. Medulla, or I'm sorry, the water boy. Medulla oblongata. I know none of you have probably seen it because I'm old. Anyway, the functions of the medulla. Again, folks, you'll notice when we look at these functions, you'll see that it's very, very basic. Like, you're not alive unless you have this. And this is going to control your heartbeat and your breathing. Again, automatic stuff. Okay, so the pons, which is just above the medulla. This is sleep and coordination. Again, if you don't sleep or you're not coordinated, you're not going to live very long. All right, reticular formation. The reticular formation is actually the nerve band that runs through the middle of the pons. Okay, and it feeds data into the thalamus. All right, and again, we are sure that the reticular formation helps in arousal, and it also helps to filter the incoming stimuli from the rest of the peripheral nervous system. All right, so this part is very important because some of the stuff, folks, that when we get into the sensory and perception unit, you're really going to understand what I mean by this, but our body pulls in millions and millions and millions of bits of data every second, and something has to filter that. In this case, the reticular formation helps us do that. Okay, the function of the thalamus. Guys, think of the thalamus as the switchboard operator of the brain, okay? It is basically the relay station between the cerebrum and the rest of the body, okay? And what that means is it is responsible for relaying incoming and all outgoing sensory information except for smell. Smell's a little bit different because it's chemical and it goes into a different portion of the brain. Okay, cerebellum. The cerebellum. The cerebellum is Latin for little brain. And the little brain, again, still part of the primal brain or the old brain. It is responsible for processing sensory input, coordination, balance, nonverbal learning, and memory. Again, very, very important. In our very distant ancestral past, we did not have a spoken language at some point in our past, but we did have communication, just like animals have communication. They're not going to read to you out of a book, but you'll know when an animal is angry or when an animal is scared. You can understand that behavior, and that is largely due in part to your cerebellum or your little brain. All right, let's talk limbic system. All right, your limbic system. These are the parts of your limbic system, and your limbic system, among other things, handles fear, aggression, and various other emotions. It also helps with your balance. Okay, so your amygdala, this little guy right here, along with this wire looking thing here, as well as part of this, the amygdala are two little almond size parts of your brain. There's one here and one, you can't see it, it's on the other side. And these are your fear and aggression centers. Okay, your hippocampus is this guy right here, and he actually connects to your amygdala, and you can see this little side wire going off here for the amygdala. That's where this guy comes in. He attaches right in there as well. And then you have your hypothalamus. Remember, the hypothalamus is the endocrine system and the central nervous system. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, again, like I said, the amygdala. These are very small almonds, sometimes referred to as lima beans, like this slide refers to them. And these are your fear, aggression, and emotional centers of the body. All right. There's a lot of research that has been done on the amygdalas. We have seen some new research. Notice this is all within the last 10 years or so. The amygdala, we think there is a connection into the right amygdala with hyperactivity or ADD, ADHD. We also think that there is social dysfunction or criminal behavior associated when your amygdala does not function properly. So when your amygdala doesn't properly function, our morality is compromised. We also see facial feedback data. There's a ton of facial feedback that's been going on for a very long time, but this fairly recent study by Mendy and Sedlecki, they found that how we view other people's faces, whether they're angry or happy, has a immediate response in our amygdala. Okay, hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is going to be crucial in our eating, drinking, and controlling our body temperature or homeostasis. Okay, or homeothermic. Sorry. It also helps govern or oversee the endocrine system via the pituitary. The pituitary, remember, is the master gland of the endocrine system. We also see it being linked to rewards and punishments, as well as other emotions. Okay, so what we see here, this is a Skinner box, okay? And our research has shown us that stimulation of the reward centers of the hypothalamus will motivate rats to cross an electrified grid. So you see here this little wire coming down in here into the reward centers of this rat. When that is stimulated, meaning a little current, electrical current, will be sent to this probe. That rat will walk across this electrified grid, and it's a very painful walk for the rat. But this stimulation pedal or food pedal will actually dispense a treat or some sort of reward for the rat. So what we see is the hypothalamus allowing the rat to overcome the pain of the electrical grid to get to the reward of the stimulation pedal. And the hypothalamus plays a key role in that. Hippocampus, the hippocampus. The hippocampus, known for a guy by the name of H.M. Henry Molaison, he gives us the information through his own tragic accident that the hypothalamus or the hippocampus is absolutely crucial into memories. All right, so this is the small structure, this light blue structure that wraps around the thalamus. Keep in mind, the thalamus is right here. You can't really see it because it's behind everything. But again, this is the ice cream cone that the rest of our brain sits on top of. Okay, it helps process effortful or conscious memories, as well as facts and events. And the case study of HM shows us this. People that have issues with their hippocampus due to surgery or whatever, they lose their ability to form new memories. They can keep all of their old memories in most cases, but they lose the ability to store new. So the hippocampus is crucial in the creation of new memories. We also see a connection with football players that have repeated head injury and damage to their hippocampus, or they actually end up with a plaqued or a shrunken hippocampus. Plaquing basically is where this heavy layer of calcium and other minerals kind of forms around it, and it causes it to not function properly. And then we see that in continuous concussions, which is why there's a lot of emphasis on concussions. Okay, folks, that is the main part of your old brain or your primal brain, your brain stem, along with your thalamus, as well as your limbic system. All right, we're going to pick up with module 12. So stay tuned. Talk to you soon.